Hey everybody, this is Death by D4, and welcome to something a bit different. This is my Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition experience, where we'll be going over one of my 3rd level one-shot adventures, titled Eve Over Orilon. If you're a player interested in joining one of my games, or a fan of my storytelling videos, then I hope you enjoy this narrative dive into what it's like to play D&D with me. And for any aspiring dungeon masters out there, feel free to follow along with my one-shots notes down in the video description below, as I'll also be taking time throughout this video to explain how I prepare and run my session. Please, if you enjoy the video, then like and subscribe to show your support, as creating this video was actually a huge undertaking for me. Anyway, with all that said, let's begin. The quaint village of Orilon isn't exactly the first place you think of when expecting trouble. It's a fairly small and quiet place, one that's usually ignored by others due to its relative isolation. Honestly, it's amazing that something like this hasn't happened until now. For the last few days, we've been receiving reports from Orilon about a number of pets and livestock that have gone missing in the middle of the night. At first, we had thought it to be a beast, so we dispatched a hunter there to resolve the matter for them. However, it would appear that things are more dire than we had first anticipated, as even our hunter has disappeared now, alongside a great many of Orilon's citizens. I need not explain to you how serious this situation has become. Now go, put an end to this before anyone else is taken. Should we resolve this matter quickly, then I'll make sure that you are well rewarded for your efforts. The words of your guildmaster echo softly within the deep recesses of your mind. After all, there's been little else for you to do these past few days, as you've made your way along the Alpine Trail. However, it would appear that, at long last, you finally arrived at your destination. Cresting over the nearby hilltop, you're met by the humble settlement of Orilon, a small and quaint village to say the least, nestled down within the deepened recesses of a flourishing valley. Its roads are narrow, worn, and made of dirt. Its homes are bland, cheap, and made of common wood and stone. Between you and the village center, you spy a fair number of sprawling farmlands, each of them in the early stages of growth with their handlers running about, tending to their crops for the coming season. It's almost as if there's no trouble there at all, even in spite of your current business. Regardless, you make your way down the road and continue heading towards the village. Along your way there, you pass by one of the nearby farmlands and are suddenly approached by a small brown-haired girl. She appears to be around 10 years old, and she greets you with an innocent and heartwarming smile. "Are you adventurers?" she calls out to you. Now, it is at this point that I finally pass control of the game over to my players. Yes, it's a bit of a long-winded introduction, but the story has now been established and I've gone and presented my players with something to do. That way things can now naturally begin to progress from there. This is how I start all of my one-shots, with a bit of introductory flavor text going over the session's main objective, and a quick outline of all possible objectives for my own personal use. From there, I split the general outline of my adventure out into chapters, each with a small block of information that I can quickly reference as my players progress. Of course, my players could always just go and throw me for a loop, but as long as I provide them with a clear idea of how they can progress, the chances of that actually happening are pretty minimal overall. Anyway, I won't bog you all down with these notes right now, but I will throw up any relevant ones later as we continue along with our story. Surprised by the small child's question, you slowly approach her and admit to her that you are, which then causes her to laugh and exclaim that you all look so strange and funny to her. Now, don't worry, she isn't mean about it, but her loud rambunctiousness is enough to draw over the attention of her mother, who then comes over and asks you for your names. Upon introducing yourselves, the mother then tells you that her name is Janice, and tells her daughter Madeline to then go on and head inside. However, before she does, Madeline then turns to you and says one more thing. "You best make sure you're not inside before dark around here, or else the old watchman's going to get you." In response to hearing Madeline say that, Janice then quickly shoos her daughter away before she could say anything else. "Please ignore her," she says to all of you. "What she speaks of is merely an old fairy tale, nothing more." Intrigued, however, you then ask the mother to share the tale with you, as you're curious to know if it holds any relevance to your ongoing quest. "Well, it's a simple tale, really," Janice says to you. "A long time ago, back when Orilon was first founded, there was a young man who had lost his beloved to the hands of a terrible beast in the middle of the night. Enraged, the man then set out to the forest, intent on avenging his wife. However, he was no match for the terrible creature. Now, his spirit haunts the streets of Orilon, acting as a grim reminder to all those who happen to be caught out after dark." Anyway, like I said, it's just a fairy tale. As far as I've ever seen, there's never been a ghost here or any kind of terrible beast. That said, don't go telling the children that if you could. It does well to help keep them behaved. From that point on, you speak to the mother a bit more and ask her if she knows where the guild hunter was last seen. She admits to you that she doesn't know, but points you down the road and tells you to check at the Devilish Steed Inn, as someone there could likely help you. So, with that as your heading, you thank Janice for her help and continue along your way. Here are my notes for that scene. As usual, I start off with 2 quick sentences describing the setting. The first one is usually be describing the scene's most obvious features, with the second one being more general information, such as the time of day, weather, or general atmosphere. Admittedly, this is largely consistent with what I already established in the session's introduction. Next, I note down the scene's main events, those being the players' meetings with Madeline and Janice. Then, if my players then ask the right questions, they'll obtain some knowledge in the form of the Watchman of Orilon and the Devilish Steed. Here's my reference guide for Janice and Madeline's characters. As with all of my character references, I note down only their primary roles and their two main personality traits, which I mostly just use to come up with how to voice and act out the character on the fly. And finally, because it's important that I don't mess this up, I went ahead and wrote out the entire tale of the Watchman of Orilon in advance. In actuality, my players don't really need this information, but it does foreshadow a moment that I have planned for the end of the session, so I've put it in there to reward my players for being engaged and attentive with my content. In no time at all, you arrive at the Devilish Steed, which is a large 2-story tavern that's probably a lot bigger than it has any right to be, especially for such a small village. Upon stepping inside, you're surprised to find that the place is a lot nicer than you anticipated, with many chairs and tables set about, a well-stocked bar to the side, and the welcoming scent of a hot meals plate wafting in from over the nearby kitchen. There are but a few people inside, likely merchants going about some business off the beaten road. However, they seem to pay little mind to you as they keep to themselves and feast upon their afternoon meals. Seeming to notice you as soon as you arrive, you're welcomed by Trent Stonemason, the innkeeper of the Devilish Steed, who's a tired-looking bald man with a thick beard and deep creases lining his face. Upon introducing yourselves to him in kind, you then quickly get down to business and ask him if he has any information pertaining to your missing hunter. Thankfully, he does know your hunter, and even goes on to mention his name, Elric Farrowglaive, and states that he stayed there at the inn for some time before his disappearance.
Elric disappeared here about a week ago,
He says to you.
Before then, he had been in and out of here repeatedly. Terrible shame, really. He was a nice fellow. I wish I could tell you more, but I'm afraid that he made no attempt to share his business with me whenever he was here.
Curiously, you then ask Trent if you could check out the room that Elric had stayed in during his time there. Without hesitation, Trent then nods and hands you a key before directing you to the location of Elric's room. After thanking him, you then bid him farewell and head upstairs. Upon entering Elric's room, you're immediately met by a small space featuring an unused desk, a freshly made bed, and an empty dresser. However, upon making an investigation check, you're then able to find a worn notebook hidden underneath the bed's mattress, one that just so happens to be a journal belonging to Elric. As you flip through the pages, you're able to learn some of the things that he was able to accomplish during his investigation. Apparently, he had been focusing on an area just north of the village, as that had been where most of the disappearances had taken place in so far. From there, he had been able to discover some tracks belonging to a creature that he couldn't identify. One he figured was likely the cause behind the recent disappearances. The tracks themselves he only described as thin and spindly, almost like narrow drag marks with no discernible footprint or direction. It's very clear from his ramblings that the mystery of this creature's identity simply infuriated him, not to mention the fact that all of his attempts to track it down were met with failure. Beyond that, his final entry does very little actually help you. However, he does mention a man by the name of Hadrif, who, from what he described, was a local that had offered him some help during the later end of his investigation. In light of this discovery, you head back downstairs and ask Trent if he knows anything about a man named Hadrif. Fortunately, he does, as Trent then informs you that Hadrif is an old wizard who lives in a tower just north of the village. Aside from that, he doesn't personally know him very well. However, he does mention that Hadrif is very well liked by many of the villagers, as he has helped them upon multiple occasions whenever they've fallen ill. Deciding then you better pay Hadrif a visit, you then thank Trent for all of his help before making your way up along the road towards his tower. Here's my notes for that scene. As usual, I start off with 2 quick sentences describing the setting, which I've broken up between the different scenes. Then I noted down the meeting with Trent, outlined his character, and his information pertaining to Elric, which I have scripted up in advance. However, in regard to Elric's hidden journal, I went ahead and noted down the mattress obstructing it. Then I listed out its required skill check, DC, and the result of a successful roll. As for the actual contents of Elric's journal, I made sure to script that out in advance as well, as the information provided by it is actually quite important. After all, not only does it hint towards the identity of the village threat, but it also introduces my players to Hadrif, who's somebody that I want them to meet. In the event that my players don't actually investigate Elric's room, I could just have Trent offer them the room's key on his own accord, or even the journal itself. However, in the event that my players don't even go to the Devilish Steed to begin with, I instead have an alternative encounter where the deranged homeless man named Frisk Hagen ambushes them in the middle of the streets. He can then prattle on to them about some kind of terrible wizard in the north that's going around and bewitching people. Sure, this stunt is a bit like showing my hand, but it's still something that I could do in order to keep things on track. Oh, and as an additional backup, I've gone and prepared a few filler characters that I can use literally just in case if I need them. It isn't too long before you eventually arrive at Hadrif's tower, though certainly long enough for the midday sun to rise beneath a thinly veil of cloud. The tower before you is both tall and imposing, featuring architecture unlike anything that you've seen so far. Upon knocking on its door, you are then greeted by a withering old man garbed in a heavy robe and alchemical equipment. He introduces himself as Hadrif the Alchemist, which confuses you for a moment, as Trent had told you that Hadrif was actually a wizard. Tiredly, Hadrif then laughs it off and tells you that he'd given up his arcane practices a long time ago. Now he just spends his time practicing alchemy, which he uses to help the local villagers. With that misunderstanding out of the way, you then ask Hadrif if he knows anything that happened to Elric. Thankfully, he says he does, and directs you towards a place not far from his tower, known as the Dingy Grotto. Apparently, it had been a lair for some terrible creature in the past, so Elric had gone to investigate it. However, Hadrif unfortunately informs you that he's not seen Elric since, which doesn't bode well for the young hunter's fate. So, armed with that knowledge, you then decide to follow in Elric's footsteps and head off towards the Dingy Grotto, steeling yourself for whatever manner of creature could await for you inside it. Here are my notes for that scene. Pretty straightforward overall, with a minor note made for the setting to progress the time of day and to change the weather. However, as a dungeon master, it's important for you to know that Hadrif is actually a possible main antagonist for this one-shot. However, due to him having a ring of mind shielding equipped at this particular moment, my players will not be able to figure this out. So, no matter how hard they try, simply play him off as a trusted ally. That said, in the event that your players just outright kill Hadrif for no reason, feel free to just write him off as a villain. Seriously, it'll actually change nothing about the session other than just maybe making it end a little bit earlier. A short while later, and you arrive at the Dingy Grotto, finding it to be this damp and narrow passageway that runs steeply down to the cold depths of the earth. Cautiously, you begin your descent, weapons drawn and torches lit, as you keep an eye peeled for anything that could be lurking for you in the dark. Before long, the light of the grotto's mouth fades into nothingness behind you, and you're met with a truly unusual sight. There, lying at the furthest reaches of your vision, lies a faintly glowing violet light. Cautiously, you continue on your way there, and then are met by a rampantly sprawling bed of luminescent mushrooms. Curiously, you make a nature check and inspect the mushrooms to find that they are simply unlike anything that you've ever seen before. However, you do notice that the mushrooms seem to possess a strange resonance to sound, almost as if they seem to shake and quiver whenever loud noises are made nearby them. Well, with your observations concluded there, you gather your things up and then continue along your way. Here are my notes for that scene. Again, very straightforward with very little happening at this point. The mushrooms that my players have encountered are considered far planar fungi, and respond primarily to loud noises. If startled, they will release a burst of phosphorus spores, though at this point they won't actually deal any damage and will only temporarily blind the players. However, during a later encounter, I actually plan on changing this, allowing my players then to gain some foreshadowing of a possible future event without punishing them right now for their eager curiosity. Shortly thereafter, you notice a sudden change in the ground beneath your feet. It would appear that the slope that is continuing to worsen as you progress. Carefully, you lower yourselves down towards the ground and continue your descent until you're met by a steep and sudden drop. Glancing over the edge, you find it to be a 30-foot drop down into a bed of sharpened stones and rocks. Faintly, you can see the rotted hue of dried blood and shattered bone nestled amongst the rocks down below, along with a passageway leading further into the grotto. It would appear that you must traverse this. Well, seeing as this is the perfect time to make use of it, you pull out a long length of rope from your pack and tie it to a P-tin that you then jam into the earth. With relative ease then, you're able to safely make your way down the drop and then continue along your way. For this scene, I genuinely want to bait out my players using a rope for a villainous moment later. Considering that they're only 3rd level, this is very likely going to occur, as my players will likely want to leave the rope behind too as a means to return. However, if by chance my players don't do this, or they foolishly just decide to just climb down the slippery cliff face without any aid, then I can force them to make a saving throw, with the advantage if they actually have a climbing speed, resulting in them taking huge damage if they fall down upon the sharpened rocks below. This may seem a bit mean, especially since the damage numbers I picked for this are rather high, but the rope is a guaranteed means of success. And, quite honestly, my players deserve to have this happen to them if they're just going to try and blow through this hurdle without thinking through their actions correctly. The next chamber boasts a leveled floor for you to walk upon, and is littered with various bones and skulls strewn about. A quick check around the room reveals nothing of value to you. Seriously, not even a copper piece. However, upon making a medicine check to carefully examine the bones, you find that they've been picked clean by something hard and sharp. Not only that, but the skulls themselves show signs of something curious. They've all been cracked in from the back side, and their cavities scraped clean, almost as if the brains housed inside of them were forcefully excavated. Well, armed with this information, you then make a nature check to try and strain yourself to conceive of a possible creature that would do such a thing. Unfortunately, you're unable to. Frustrated, you then toss the bones aside and continue surveying the room, though it appears that you've actually reached a dead end. However, upon making an investigation check to check even further, you spot something along the ground near the backside walls of the chamber. Long, spindly drag marks akin to those mentioned in Elric's journal. Curiously, they appear to move towards the chamber wall and then just disappear without a reason. Seeing this, you suspect there to be trickery of some kind afoot. With a hand, you reach out and touch the nearby wall, and then brush away the illusion there, revealing an entranceway leading deeper into the grotto. Well, it appears to be that you found your way forward, so that you gather up your things and continue on your way. In this scene, I want to give context to my players about the threat of Orilon, being specifically how it devours things and removes their brains. By making proper checks, this information can then be made available to them. However, since it's very unlikely for a 3rd level character to actually know about the existence of a Grell, which is the identity of the Orilon threat, I've made the DC for this preceding nature check to identify it really high, as it should be very unlikely that they would actually know this. Beyond that, any reasonable investigation check will allow the players to discover the illusory wall leading forward, with any failure simply resulting in them finding the tracks before the wall instead. If they find the tracks, then my players are very likely going to be able to discover the wall immediately afterwards. However, in the event that they fail to find the wall entirely, I can just ambush them early with the Grell, allowing them to then stay on track with everything before they get any ideas about going back the way they came. Before long, you are met by the sounds of rushing water, before you emerge out along a stone walkway extending over a cavernous abyss. With eyes turned towards the shadows, you continue along the bridge before entering into a large stone-cut chamber, lined with many luminescent mushrooms. Amongst the various shapes of rubble strewn about the place, you notice then a large circular archway with the shapes of runes carved upon its surface. Unfortunately, it seems to be its structural integrity is fractured and broken, much like everything else in the entire room. As you approach the archway, you then find familiar markings of Elvish scripture upon a nearby pillar. Upon reading it, you then find that the scripture itself appears almost primitive in its use, though surprisingly complex in its vocabulary. From what you can read, this area was apparently used as some kind of place for research and a hub for transportation. Though you're unable to discern the nature of the research, you suspect it to be of arcane nature, as you later find delineations referring specifically to conjurative magic. Finally, you then come across an incomplete list of locations bearing importance to the chamber's research. However, you fail to recognize any of the names on this list. In fact, from their very pronunciation, you find them to be almost foreign to you on a planar level. In this scene, I'm setting up the possible origins of all the aberrations and monstrosities that my players are about to encounter. You see, the ruined chamber that my players have come across is some kind of teleportation hub used by the ancient elves, long lost and buried deep beneath underground. All of the information that I want them to learn about it has been scripted up in advance. However, it is noted that it is written in Elvish, so there's a chance my players might not actually be able to understand it. However, chances are that one of my players will be able to read it, whether it's because they know Elvish or they could just use magic to do it. And then suddenly you hear muffled screams echoing out from behind you. Quickly you turn about and you find the heads of your allies encased in the blackened shape of dark mantles. As initiative is rolled, you then fight alongside your allies and help free them from your assailants, beating them back away into the shadows. Then as you do so, you hear the far-off cries of some terrible creature headed towards you from the darkness laid above. Finally, as you dispatch with the last of the dark mantles, you are then met by a horrible sight. Lunging down to you with feral intent is a large brain-like creature with the mouth of an eagle and the barbed tendrils of an octopus, the unmistakable form of a Grell. Seeing this as the village threat, you then rally yourselves against the aberration and dive in against it. Swords are swung and spells are cast, and despite the paralytic lashings dealt to you by the terrible creature, you gain the upper hand of the battle. However, as the creature's blood then begins to flow from its body, you watch then as it lets out a sudden deafening cry, one that causes you to reel back away from it as your eye then catches sight of the luminescent mushrooms collected beneath your feet. Then, in genuine terror, you watch as the mushrooms then begin to shake and writhe before exploding, creating a blinding cloud of phosphorus spores. At that moment, you then choke terribly upon their toxins as you desperately try to maintain your ground within the fight. Quickly, you brace yourself against the incoming blows dealt to you by the Grell before returning your fury in kind. Before long, you're finally able to recollect yourselves before successfully driving back the terrible creature. Then, with bodies battered and terribly bruised, you fall down upon your knees before the dead carcass of your aberrant quarry. You have defeated the Grell of the Dingy Grotto. So, either once my players have learned the knowledge of the portal room, or they just simply try to leave it, I have the dark mantles then drop down from the ceiling and ambush them. For general fairness and narrative purposes only, I make sure there's only 3 dark mantles. That way there can at least be one player to witness the whole event and react accordingly to it. Then, one round later, I foreshadow the incoming Grell by having its sound heard off in the distance. That way it doesn't just seem to appear on my players completely randomly. Then maybe 1 or 2 rounds later, depending on how the fight is really going for them, I then throw the Grell in and then everything goes off standardly. That is until the Grell gets around half HP, in which case it then shrieks, causing all of the far planar fungi within the room to burst, creating a cloud of toxins that then deals poison damage to my players, half damage on a successful save, and blinding them for up to 1 minute, with repeated attempts at the save made at the end of every turn. In general, this isn't much of a crazy attack for them to deal with overall, but it certainly will help dial up the tension of the moment, and help make the entire encounter feel a little bit more epic. Within the wake of your victory, you take a moment to have a short rest. Once you're finished, you then gather yourselves up and make your way back up towards the surface. That is, or at least you try to, as you're then met by an unexpected complication. You see, upon reaching the steep drop which you rappelled down earlier with a rope, you come to find that your rope is no longer there. In fact, what remains of it is simply a smoldering pile of ash upon the ground before you. Worried and confused, your mind then scrambles to come up with a logical explanation for this, that and possibly a solution as well to your newfound obstacle. Just who or what could have done this? Well, after much consideration, there appears to be only one real answer: Hadrif the alchemist. After all, he was the only person that actually knew you were there in the grotto at that time. Furious at his deception, you then struggle to make your way back up along the cliff face, desperately trying not to fall. By the end of it, you're winded but relieved, and finally emerge from the grotto shortly after sundown. Without delay, you then head off towards Hadrif's tower, intent on confronting him with your growing suspicions behind his true intentions. Okay, so in general, I kind of have to improvise this scene every time I do it, as all I really have to do is just show my players some signs that Hadrif cannot be trusted. Whatever I do, it just can't be something like a cave-in, as it has to be an act intended to impede their progress back that can then be traced back to a humanoid's actions. Thankfully, since my players usually use rope to go down that cliff, I can usually have them just return and find that the rope is all burned up. However, if I'm ever actually completely stumped on ideas of what to do right then, I'll just allow my players to return back unimpeded, and then see if they happen to return to Hadrif's tower on their own. Otherwise, if they simply emerge from the grotto and head straight back to Orilon, or maybe if the session has simply gone on for too long, I may just write off Hadrif as the real antagonist and then wrap up the session there. Sure, it does leave the session on a bit of a low note, but all this moment is technically optional, and I want to allow my players to feel like their actions have some meaning. So if they're playing along with everything and taking in all the details as they emerge, then they're more than likely going to come across the one-shot's true ending anyway. Finally, upon arriving at Hadrif's tower, you're quick to learn that he isn't actually there. In fact, it would appear to be that he left the tower in quite a rush, as even the front door was left unlocked. Well, seeing as this is a good opportunity for you to thoroughly investigate his premises, you head on inside and search through his abode. The top room of Hadrif's tower is an elaborate laboratory featuring a wide array of alchemical equipment and apparatuses, complemented by a messy array of scrolls and tomes scattered around in a chaotic manner. You then decide as a group to divide and conquer, each make an investigation check to explore a different part of the lab. One of you is actually able to discover a small stash of loot, containing a handful of healing potions alongside a pouch of gold pieces. Another of you decides to search through the many various tomes and journals littered about the place. As you would expect by reading through them, you find that the writings to be terribly boring, droning on and on about all sorts of magical experiments or alchemical studies. However, as you pass through some of Hadrif's more recent entries, you then find the focus of his studies suddenly changes. First, he appeared to have recently reworked the foundation of his medicine, attempting to introduce some kind of new material to it. Intent on finding the truth, you delve deeper. Apparently, this new medicine of his is distilled from something he calls far-planar fungi and freshly dissolved brain matter. He then briefly goes into how he's obtained each of these materials, citing the purple fungi from the grotto as well as the local grell. In fact, he even notes the unique eating habits of the grell, with how it goes about excavating the creature's brain from its skull before devouring it. Apparently, they do this because brain matter is toxic to them. Who knew? Then, as you start to piece everything together, you come across one final journal entry that makes your skin crawl. Apparently, Hadrif acquired some kind of unique arcane focus, one which he claims can properly channel his mental energies, allowing him to trigger the new effects of his medicine. You know not what he's done, but apparently it will allow him to psychically dominate those that he's treated. At this point, you're quick to dismiss the healing potions that you found earlier, suspecting them to actually be tainted. However, the last item acquired from you ransacking Hadrif's tower is a small golden ring with a cerebral gemstone endowed upon it. Eager to see its effects, you then try it on, and then suddenly hear a voice echoing within your head.
Who are you?
Asks the familiar voice. You then state your name to it and ask the voice for its name in return.
I am Hadrif Shashk,
says the voice, which confuses you. You then ask Hadrif where he is, and the voice then replies,
No, whatever you have seen, it is not me. That thing has slain me and taken my body as its own. I have learned of its terrible schemes, and I know what it intends to do to the people of Orilon. You must go and stop it before any harm comes to them.
At that moment, your eyes then catch something happening outside of the nearby windows. There, amidst the darkness of night, you see an eerie greenish fog descending down upon the village. You know now what you must do. Quickly, you gather your things and make your way back towards the village, weapons drawn and at the ready, as you prepare yourselves for whatever inevitable fight is laid ahead of you. So this whole scene really does rely on my players actually going to Hadrif's tower and snooping around inside of it. Honestly, considering where they are, and the fact that I leave the door unlocked as well, this is still very likely to occur even if they don't have a hint that he's evil yet. Otherwise, depending on what they do, I could still simply escalate the flow of events or still write off Hadrif as a villain if I need to. That said, for the investigation checks to search Hadrif's tower, I've specifically tagged the Ring of Mind Shielding outside of the successful roll, meaning that my players will always find it regardless of the successful check. Beyond that, they do have to put it on to be able to hear the voice of Hadrif's soul trapped within the ring, so it's still not entirely guaranteed that they'll get any of this information. Still, it is very likely that this will happen, or at the very least that they'll spend enough time at the tower for events to progress back in the town. Oh, and as usual for any of the information provided in Hadrif's journal, I've gone and prepared that in advance. Finally, I could make the healing potions found in Hadrif's tower actually tainted by his alchemy, but I'd personally rather not, especially if my players have to be running on fumes at this point during the adventure. After all, they're only 3rd level, and I don't want to actually go and wipe them out. However, if they're absolutely crushing it, then I might consider something during the moment if it feels appropriate. But it really is just a spur of the moment kind of thing if it actually happens. Finally, under the veil of the night, you enter into the streets of Orilon, basked in an unearthly light, and come upon Hadrif, whose staff lies at the source of the terrible glow.
Ah, adventurers,
Says Hadrif.
You've arrived, just as I expected you would. Truly you know not of the affairs in which you meddle with. Now I shall make this town your grave.
Then, with a wave of his staff and a surge of blinding light, you watch as the doors of the homes laid around you suddenly burst open, and out falls a heavy surge of mindless villagers, all armed to the teeth with various tools and instruments. It would appear that this has become your final battle. Quickly, you roll for initiative and do your best to subdue and push back the assailing villagers, trying your best not to kill any of them while you do so. Valiantly, you fend against the wave of clubs and pitchforks as you brace yourself against Hadrif's repeated volleys of magic missile. Then, as you finally break through, you fall upon Hadrif and surround him within the chaos. Swiftly, you throw everything that you can against the wicked wizard, and with one final blow, you decapitate him, sending his head spiraling out into the mist some ways down the road. With that, the blighted power within Hadrif's staff then begins to fade, as you then watch as the mob of brainwashed villagers fall unconscious upon the ground. It would appear that the battle is now finally over. However, before you have a moment to rest, you then hear rampant scrawling coming from down the road where Hadrif's severed head lays. As you fall upon it, you then watch as it begins to shake and quiver, and then you watch in horror as it suddenly bursts open, revealing a brain-like creature mounted upon 4 grotesque legs, an intellect devourer. Wildly, the creature then lunges out towards you, swiping away at you with its feral claws, as its psychic powers then attempt to eat your brain from within your skull. However, it would appear that the aberrant pest is no match for your mighty steel, as after a few decisive hits, you then splattered the terrible thing upon the mud-soaked streets. You have now truly and finally put an end to the threat of Orilon. For this final battle, I swarm my players with a large number of commoners and protect Hadrif with a couple of higher level thugs. That way my players shouldn't be able to just blitz through everything and then attack Hadrif without leaving themselves vulnerable to attacks. For Hadrif himself, I gave him the stat block of the evil mage from the Lost Mines of Phandelver, which means that he's actually pretty frail overall. However, I know that his ability to cast Magic Missile actually makes him secretly a very dangerous threat to the players, as anybody who gets down can then be instantly killed by him by a casting of that spell. Seriously, that spell does a 3 automatic hits and it takes 3 hits to kill somebody when they're on the ground. It genuinely does instantly kill them. However, I will admit, I hold off on actually using that tactic unless there's a really good moment for me to pull it off. Anyway, if any of my players are interested in not killing any of the villagers, I then inform them that they can by declaring their intent before making a melee attack. After all, this is only fair that I do this, as they should be able to react accordingly to the unique situation. Of course, they could really just go and kill everybody, and trust me, I've had people who've done that in this one shot. But if they do, I then just adjust my ending around to be suitable for their cruel acts against the villagers. Finally, once Hadrif has been defeated, I remove all the villagers from the encounter and just throw the Intellect Devourer at them. This is certainly no joke, as an Intellect Devourer is actually a very dangerous creature for a low-level monster. However, despite this, it's still a very frail creature, so proactive players should be able to handle it before it has a chance to kill anybody. That said, if anybody actually does die, then it'll make for a really dramatic turn for the final encounter, that's for sure. As you catch your breath, you watch then as the mist around you suddenly intensifies. Blinded by it, you desperately try to make sense of what's going on. Then, like an apparition in the night, you watch as a tall, darkened shadow suddenly appears within the blinding veil, seemingly glaring at you with a hatred unlike anything that you've ever felt before. Then, as it utters a few words to you, those in a tongue that you fail to understand entirely, it suddenly vanishes without a trace, taking with it the mist alongside the corpse of the Intellect Devourer. Later, as dawn breaks the following day, you're relieved to see that most of the villagers have safely recovered from their bout of psionic domination. In fact, most don't even remember the event happening at all, which likely bodes well for the village's future. With one final check, you find that all traces of the aberrations have since disappeared from the village, sparing all those left behind in their wake. Still, you know not entirely what you saw at the end of that terrible eve over Orilon, but one thing is for certain, you never wish to see such horrors ever again. During this ending scene, I have a creature appear before my players intended to reference back to the legend of the Watchman of Orilon. However, the astute amongst my players may pick up on the fact that the creature is in fact a mind flayer. But don't worry, nobody has to worry about that at this particular moment. Beyond that, it may seem surprising, but I actually don't script up my endings in advance, or at least not usually, as I want to be able to speak impromptu to my players as a result of their actions. That and, usually, whenever I have, my players have just gone and thrown me for a massive loop anyway, so I've just learned to try and keep a general idea of what I want to have happen in the ending, and just roll with it from there. Anyway, with that final encounter done and my player's quest now finally completed, quickly wrap everything up, and bring an end to my one-shot. And that's it. If you liked the video, then be sure to subscribe and let me know what you think down in the comments below. And if you'd like to have the chance to play D&D with me, then feel free to join my Discord server, and consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see all of you in the next video.